Welcome back to the Canon Screenagers. It's your favorite movie podcast. It's the only movie podcast providing you with a watch list of the most essential movies ever made. My name is Raf. I'll be your host for today and every day, honestly. But we've got another amazing movie lined up for you. We're going to be talking The Night of the Hunter, a movie that I actually had not seen prior to this viewing, which is very exciting. I always like diving into a new movie on this show. But joining me today, very excited to have back on the show a great guest, a good pal, Felicia Maroni of the Seeing Faces in Movies podcast. How's it going? Welcome back. How have you been?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me back. I'm genuinely honored and to talk about a banger. So I'm excited.
An absolute banger. When I was like gauging interest from folks about different movies that were lined up for this season, I think you like immediately hopped on The Night of the Hunter. I don't know if there are any other movies uh that you pointed out, but I think Night of the Hunter, you were like, yep, I'm the one for that.
hmm I'm sure there were other ones, but I definitely would jump at any chance to rewatch this and talk about Robert Mitchum and the
Yeah,
cinematography in this movie. So I'm excited.
we will definitely be jumping into all of that. I'm excited to have someone who is like I'll say like more well versed in this movie than I am, so you can sort of like fill in a lot of the like blind spots and stuff that I had, watching this for the first time and being like a first time viewer. We were talking
hmm
before we started recording that this movie kind of like invites multiple viewings, and I don't think I got everything that I needed to get the first time around. So I'm happy to have you fill in like some of those spots for me and for anyone else who maybe watch this only for the first time. But before we talk about the movie, mention that you have Seen Faces in Movies, your show. For
hmm
anyone who has not listened to it or is not aware of it or did not listen to your great guest spot on Portrait of a Lady on Fire, do you want to give folks a little bit of background on like what it is that you're doing over there?
Yeah. So just to preface, on a mini hiatus right now, but we'll be coming back with a new series soon enough. But essentially, the show is each month I focus on either a different director or cinematographer and invite different guests on each week. Depending on how the month falls, it's usually either 4 to 5 films that we discuss within that artist's filmography, and it's more so a study of where that artist was in their career and what led them to make that film. We obviously discuss the content of the film, but it's more so, where were they that led them to make this movie and where did they go after this? What did they do right before this? So it's kind of just a celebration of the artist. And sometimes the artist is a bit problematic and you try to navigate
What?
celebrating their
They're
work.
problematic filmmakers?
Unfortunately, unfortunately. So that's always fun to be like, okay, I want to celebrate the work that was done because they're not the only person involved
Mhm.
in this. Um, but also acknowledging that people are weird.
People are weird, and sometimes said weird people make movies, and sometimes they're cool movies. Other times they're not so
hmm
cool. And yeah, we acknowledge it and we talk about it, and I mean sometimes it adds to the context of like what makes a movie what it is
hmm
all of that baggage that a particular filmmaker is is bringing to it. So the show is great. If you haven't listened, you should go listen to it. It's on a mini hiatus, but there's still plenty of episodes in the
hmm
backlog that folks can check out. None featuring me, which is like okay, I guess. But
Coming up very soon, trust me.
so if there's anyone who like is like specifically looking for that, you won't find it, but you will find a lot of really good conversations about interesting films and interesting filmmakers. And Felicia and all your guests, like you guys are great and always knock it out of the park.
I
So
appreciate it.
I would highly recommend. Uh, I don't know if we spoke about this last time, but do you have a background in filmmaking or just a general
Um,
cinephile?
I did go to film school. I went to film school, but it wasn't production that I studied. It was film
Hmm.
history. So my background is in that. So my interest was in, and still continues to be, in going back and figuring out what inspired this particular artist, and going back and going back and going back until there's no going back. So I'm definitely a victim of not keeping up with the newer stuff. I try to do it at least 1 month a year. That's usually my February. So it's right now where I'm catching up on last year's stuff. But
Hmm.
it is quite difficult for me because I'm like, there's so much stuff I need to catch up on, decades worth of stuff
Yeah.
before I can get into what's new. But I try and support new cinema because I know it's difficult out there. But yes, my background has always been in the historical aspect of film.
Hell yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because the first time that you were on the show, we spoke about a movie that was like one of the more recent entries into the canon,
Yeah,
and you were like, "Yeah, I
oddly enough.
typically like don't watch newer movies, but you picked one that was from like 5 years ago." But
Mhm.
now this is like maybe a little bit more in your wheelhouse.
This is very much like the 50s is like peak me.
Yeah,
Portrait of a Lady on Fire is a one-off that I happen to have seen around the time it came out, and just it was like a testament to being like, okay, I do need to keep up with newer film. Not all
yeah.
of it, obviously, but there are a lot of films being made today that are of value.
Y-
But yeah,
so-
the 1950s is definitely more
that's more
my
your speed.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
your wheelhouse. I
Very
loved it,
much.
and there is a lot with this movie to talk about in terms of its like historical context,
Mhm,
both in terms of like what it is pulling from and what then like later pulls from it, and
mhm,
also just sort of like where it sits in like a really interesting place in like the history of American cinema, for like a lot of different reasons, which I'm sure we'll get into.
mhm.
Maybe we'll get into it starting now. Why not? Now feels like as good of a time as any to start talking about the Night of the Hunter. So,
Yeah.
in order to jump into the movie, I guess for you, so you've seen this a few times. This is a movie that you are a pretty big fan of. What is like your like overall relationship to this movie? Like, when did you first come across it? Was it something you studied in film school? Like, did it jump out to you immediately, or when did it sort of like click for you?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of when I first saw this. I don't recall watching it for class, but I might have watched it for the first time while I was in film school just on my own. I think when you're a budding cinephile, you kind of go through a bunch of lists of what to watch, and this is always on so many
Yeah.
lists of films you need to watch. So
Sometimes you go through a list called the Canon, an essential
there you
movie
go.
watch list, and Night of the Hunter's on it. And
I
that's where you
mean,
pick
this is
it
a
up.
perfect type of list to go
Yeah.
through because you're talking about all, the very important films that have been released throughout several decades. So I watched this and kind of was shocked at how terrifying it could be at sometimes, because I think we are so desensitized, especially nowadays with the type of horror films that come out now, that this is not like a jump scare movie, but it feels kind of disturbing inward
Hmm.
more than other films, because this man is being invited into this home and you don't know what he's going to do, especially if you're watching it for the first time. But even rewatching it, there are some scenes that are very dark. um but I think leading up to this, I had studied in school a bunch of German expressionism, which I think
Hmm.
Lawton 100% took inspiration from, in the use of shadows and the use of like bigger sets,
Hmm.
um, and how grandiose everything looked around the actors, and that makes everything look a lot creepier, like a very sort of, Dracula style horror film.
Yeah.
Um, so the first time I watched this, I was just like, "This is wild," because it just was so beautiful. Even if you were to watch this on mute, I think you still would get so much from it because it looks very, very, very beautiful. And I don't think I even knew really any of the actors. I probably knew Lillian Gish because I'd seen A Birth of a Nation.
Hmm.
Um, but I didn't know Robert Mitchum at the time. Ended up becoming a huge fan, and I've almost seen every film he's been in
Oh, wow.
since, and it's a lot. So, big fan of this one, and also just big fan of the director, who's a really big actor. And I'm sure we'll talk about how this is the only film he ever directed, unfortunately.
Yeah. Oh man, I kind of want to talk about it now, but maybe we'll put a pin in that because there is
Mm,
a lot of other stuff that you brought up. Yeah, it is like a super haunting movie, and I think the pull from German expressionism is really interesting. We spoke last week on the show about the Maltese Falcon, which is seen as this like definitive version of film noir, which is like another
mhm.
genre that heavily pulls from German expressionism. But like this movie is kind of exists in like beyond genre or like away from genre in a weird way. Like I saw some reviews where it's referred to as a film noir and like others where it's referred to as a horror film. And
Mhm.
I have a friend who always makes fun of me for the way that I pronounce that genre. She says it's like very New York, the way that I say horror. Um,
Oh, really?
yeah, and I just caught myself. I like heard the way that I said it, and I was like, yeah, it does sound kind of weird. But anyway, this it's often like categorized as either one or the other, or sometimes both. But it's hard
Mhm,
to sort of define. And
mhm.
when you were talking about it, there's nothing like this movie. So it would have been really interesting if like the influence of German expressionism in like American filmmaking, if instead of like getting like the whole film noir genre, we just got like an entire genre of the Night of the Hunter.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think there are a lot of horror films that were, especially nowadays, when we're looking back on it, we're like, "Is this a noir? Is this a horror film?" I think of, like, Cat People,
Hmm.
the Jacques Tourneur film, which is in the late '40s, so it's actually before this, which also is stemming very heavily from German expressionism. So I think Lawton took it to another, level because Cat People and a lot of the films I'm thinking of that are, like, slash horror, slash noir are B movies, whereas this is not a B movie. And I love B movies. I'm not,
Hmm.
I live for B movies, but Night of the Hunter is very much not a B movie. This is like a classy, high class movie. Um, and I think that's where he takes it to another level. And I would be curious to see if people, if what would happen if people had been more inspired by this film than they didn't unfortunately end up being. And I don't know that I'm trying to figure out if you could make a film like this today
Hmm.
for a wider audience. You can make it for people who are watching,
Yeah.
Criterion movie because we'll watch anything. But for a wider audience, I don't know.
Yeah.
They might
It's
think it's too slow.
the yeah, I don't know if it would click for a wider audience today, which is also kind of like what happened when the movie was first released. And thinking about this in like relationship to like how we understand film noir more generally,
Mhm,
I think part of it is also just like where like the US was in its own history at the time, where
mhm,
obviously like coming out of the war, like every country is like dealing with its own shit and like processing what happened in very different ways.
Mhm.
I just rewatched Bicycle Thieves for something that I'm writing for the website that came out last week as of this release date, but like just like thinking about how everyone was kind of like grappling with it. I just don't think that America or like Americans in their artistic endeavors or whatever that was happening at the time would have been able to like make more movies like this. It just like wasn't in the American psyche in the way that like film noir just like made sense for where the country was. But
Yeah.
all that to say, artistically, it would have been really cool if we got more movies like this where it's like this weird what's it called, Southern Gothic
Mhm.
kind of vibe, mixing elements of horror and noir and whatever to make these like really chilling thrillers. You know, it would have been really cool. But it also then would take maybe not fully, but it would slightly take away from like the impact that this movie has like today. Like you watch it today and you're like, oh, there's not a lot like that. That's why this movie is so special.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, you brought up a lot of great points there. I think that even with something like Bicycle Thieves, which wasn't well received by the Italian people at the time, post-war, because they just were like, we don't want to be reminded of this this sadness that we're experiencing. And I think the same with this post-war, the people were looking for something more uplifting and jolly.
Mhm.
That's why you get in those mid 50s those Hollywood movies that are just like a lot of musicals that are really big, or a lot of just, family post-war stuff, but there's still a happy ending. Whereas
Yeah.
I guess there is a and we will talk about the ending from this one. Um it's not unhappy, but it's not the proto, golden age Hollywood ending that you get from a lot of films from, you know, the mid 50s. So yeah.
Yeah. It's it ends up being an interesting way to like sort of wrap things up. I think another thing that like kind of sets this movie apart from other movies that were like, you know, coming out around its time is just like the I think you mentioned like the cinematography and everything, and this is like absolutely beautiful and like stunning in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
I was just because you know the meme that's like dude who has only ever seen Boss Baby watching his second movie and he says getting a lot of Boss Baby vibes from this. Um I feel I feel like I have like a limited scope of references, but like I was getting some like Citizen Kane vibes in terms of
Mm,
um just how impressive and like innovated some of the camera work was here. But it
mhm.
also it creates this like weird, like otherworldly, like dream-like state. Like, what did you think of like how all of those elements were sort of like utilized through the camera and the way that it moves and the way that it shoots things, in terms of like building out this like weird dreamlike world for this movie?
Yeah, I mean, even more I'm even more of a cinematography fangirl than a director fangirl. I love something that looks very unique and stands out. So Stanley Cortez, who's the cinematographer for this film, he did oddly enough do another Orson Welles film called Magnificent Ambersons, and
Okay.
that was like one of his earlier ones he did. But one of my favorite ones that he shot is The Naked Kiss, which is he did, if I'm just looking, in 1964, so almost 10 years later. And it's a Samuel Fuller movie, and it kind of has a noir vibe. So I think the best stuff that he's done is in black and white. But rewatching this, the first scene that you not it's not the first scene that you see Mitchum's character in, but when the two kids are telling stories to one another, they're going to bed,
Hmm.
and you see his hat in the shadow, and then
Yeah.
the way it pops in, and I knew it was coming, but I was just like, I was kind of scared watching
Yeah.
it. It's like to build tension in something so simple as just a shadow. I think it takes a lot of skill. It's something that we've unfortunately, I don't want to say lost because I don't want to diminish the work that the modern cinematographers are doing. I blame the other factors in modern film that are,
Yeah,
not
you know who you
allowing
are.
cinematographers, yeah, to do their work. You're only allowing certain ones to do their work, and others you're just using them to kind of hold a camera. And I'm like, they're
Yeah.
there to build a story along with you. And I think this story would not have been as effective without the work of Cortez and the visuals, because it makes Mitchum's character seem so big and
Mhm.
menacing. Whereas, like, if you're familiar with Mitchum, not that he's not played a lot of villains, but he gives off a very teddy bear vibe. He's a big guy, but he's one that you want to hug, but he's terrifying in this movie.
He's
And
a
it's
big guy.
because of the way, yeah, it's because of the way he's shot in this movie that you're like, I'm terrified of you the minute you step on screen. And like I think the cinematographer studied people's faces so well in this movie
Mhm.
because the manage the way the light hits off of each of these characters is so different, and it's hitting off of like the crevices in his face, or even the young boy's face, or Lillian Gish's face, to make them
Mhm.
seem very different, um, as opposed to shooting them all the same way. You don't get the same vibe for each of these characters. So
Yeah.
I think it's just so important the way that, that this film is shot. And I personally think it's the reason why people still talk about it. The performances are great, direction's great, but I think it's mostly the look, at least for me, why people still
Yeah.
talk about it.
Well, that kinda goes to what you were saying where, like, you could watch this movie on mute and you still get the vibe of what's going on, and you can, like, totally follow the story, and you, like, understand the characters and, like, the progression of the plot on, a pretty solid,
Mhm.
standing or whatever of it, and a lot of that is to, you know, the cinematographer, and a lot of times, we think of cinematography as just, like, um we are like brain broken by like Instagram and Twitter where it's just like the one perfect shot mode of
Mm,
cinematography and it's just like a still image with like pretty colors or something and we're all like boom that's good cinematography but like no it's using the camera and the way that we're framing and lighting things within the camera to like tell the story um and
yeah.
there are moments in this movie where it's like it totally fits the, one perfect shot mold. But there is also, to what you're saying, there's like so much more that's going on here with like the camera work. Are there particular shots or like moments in this movie that like stand out to you more than others that you want to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, the one I mentioned with the hat and the shadow, but then I think there's the one very famous one with, Shelley Winters under the water. Um, how
I
they
almost
managed
jumped
to
off
get
my
that
couch. I
shot,
think I did jump off my couch. I
it's
was just like, what
beautiful,
is like
but it's terrifying.
it's terrifying, but it's just like that's cinema, baby.
Right? I was
Yeah.
and it never ceases to amaze me, that shot, and how beautiful and ethereal and sad it is, because as you're processing, "Oh, she's actually dead," you're
Mhm.
like, "Oh, we need to go back to these children who are going to have to deal with the
Yeah.
fact that they know their mom's dead and this guy's after them." There's a great shot also with the overhead of, there's a few great shots of, Mitchum's character riding the horse off kind of in the distance, and one where the kids are kind of in that top barn area and they're watching him. But when they go
Mhm.
back to the boat, there's like an overhead shot of them both asleep as they go up to like shore, I guess, before
Mhm.
Lillian Gish's character um finds them, and that's really beautiful too. So there's a lot of shots that you could just kind of take a still of and put up on your wall in
Yeah.
this.
It's great. It's awesome that it's able to do both of those. Let's just do the amazing single frame, but also let's help people understand the story and these characters. And I don't know, maybe some of the like thematic elements that we're trying to explore in the
Mhm.
movie, you know, through the camera in like a meaningful way.
Yeah.
Speaking of the characters, we should probably talk about
Mhm.
Mr. Mitchum's performance and this Harry
Yes.
Powell dude who is an all-time movie villain, I guess we'll call him. Yeah. I don't know why I put a question on that. He's a villain.
Yeah.
Totally. He's fully like an awful character.
He's pretty
Well, he's a
bad.
great character, but he's a bad guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, what is it about like his performance that like makes that character great? What is it about the character that makes it like super timeless? Like what's give me all of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a mix of at this point in Mitchum's career, he is a name, so people know him. He hasn't played that many villains, and you're mixing it with a preacher who is meant to be seen as, especially in 1950s America, as good. So
Hmm.
casting as someone that we know and the audience knows is not actually a real preacher, but you don't know if he doesn't fully believe in this or if he is just using this as a ploy. We
Hmm.
assume he is, but maybe he does have some sort of deep-seated belief in what he's preaching in quotes. It's his ability to kind of sweet talk his way into anyone's arms, apart from, John, the son, who sees right through him from the off, but
Yeah.
everyone else is just like, "Yep, we believe anything you say." And, if you think throughout history, even modern history, the use of, you know, good speeches and being able to charm your way into people's homes and hearts is not as difficult as we would like to think, unfortunately. So I think he's very modern character, actually.
Yeah. I mean, the like obvious modern comparison. I don't know
Hmm.
if you get this a lot in Canada, but in the US we have all these like TV uh evangelists or whatever, the like guys who you see on like Sunday morning with and they're in these like massive churches and they're preaching and like there's this one dude Joel Olstein who like he preaches about like prosperity and stuff and how you're going to reach it or whatever while having like a $65 million net worth. And it's just like if a guy like Powell were alive today, like that's what he would do. He wouldn't necessarily go around killing people, but he would just be like he would be a TV preacher and he would be one of the ones who was like totally just like scamming people and sliming them out of all their money, which isn't to say that like all, you know, TV preachers do that. But for the most part, not like the best version uh of religion that we see, you know, playing out.
Mm, yeah.
Oftentimes it feels like there's something kind of nefarious going on there and not a true dedication to like, you know, what Christianity could be. And that is like this dude's whole vibe, you know, give us all of your sermons about love and hate. We know that you're a scumbag, dude. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. We don't have those really in Canada, but I am familiar with the person you mentioned. So, yeah, he feels very much like that. And oddly enough, not to skip ahead, which I won't, but it ties into one of my recommendations for later. A similar character, uh, who I feel like those type of characters are very interesting for film, to be honest.
Oh
And
yeah.
it takes a certain personality to be able to play those characters believably. And I think Mitchum did a really good job in this.
Yeah.
He's
I mean,
quite terrifying.
he knocks it out of the ballpark. He's so terrifying, but he also has that like snake oil salesman kind of charm to him.
Mhm.
Um, And I mean, sort of to what you were saying, like this is a hard character for 1950s America to like digest. I would assume. I don't think that there were many people who were like, you know, like, oh yeah, like let's have a story about like a false preacher who murders widows and takes their fortunes.
Yeah. I would love to read more about what the reception was from, like, the average person at the time. But I also think that the best type of movies are the ones that were kind of hated when they came out.
Yeah. Shout out Megalopolis. Uh,
Very much would love to shout out Megalopolis.
yeah. uh, so okay, you are a huge Mitchum head. You've seen
Mhm.
pretty much all of his movies. Where does this rank in terms of like his all-time performances
This is
for you personally?
definitely up there, and rewatching it was great because it was one that I hadn't revisited in a while, because I usually go towards his more Western, performances or his noir stuff, so he's done
Hmm.
kind of a lot of everything, and I'm just kinda looking here as to what he did right before this and right after, which I've seen both. Not a Stranger, where he played a doctor, and Man with a Gun, which is a Western. He did, like, an insane amount of, uh, films, and he was always kind of like the nice, sweet guy with a bit of an edge. One of my
Hmm.
favorites, though, is Angel Face, which is a noir that he did with Gene Simmons, and it's Otto Preminger who directed it, and he plays a guy who is the romantic obsession of Gene Simmons, and he's just kinda like, "Oh, what's going on here?" He's trying to get out of it. I didn't think he's great, but I honestly he's never been bad, in my opinion, in any film. Some of the films haven't been great, but he's
But
always
he's
great.
always good. Yeah. Is he someone who could be uh like someone's romantic obsession? He's kind of a like what a great face. Just an
Yes,
amazing face. We don't see faces like that in movies anymore.
you do not.
Trying to think. Maybe like Adam Driver, is like the closest we'll get to someone who
100%.
is like he's kind of unconventionally beautiful,
Mhm.
in a really captivating way. Um, Pretty likable guy, but like has a bit of an edge to him. You know, is
Yep.
Adam Driver our modern day Robert Mitchum?
I 100% agree, and I always complain that we don't get, like, normal looking people in film anymore who are, like, these big stars, because everyone, is being forced to look a certain way, but Adam Driver is a I don't even know if you would call him normal looking guy. He's an odd looking dude, but there's something
Yeah,
so captivating about the way he looks that makes him attractive, because he's so fully himself, and he's
yeah.
odd, and Robert Mitchum was odd too, and fully himself, and as far as I know, never got any cosmetic work done because oddly enough, there was cosmetic work being done back then too.
Hmm.
I think he was just like, "This is what I look like. I'm not gonna bother." He was
Yeah.
so busy. His favorite thing to do was to just smoke weed and just show up, do work, and go home.
What
And
a
you have
legend.
to appreciate a working actor like that.
Yeah. Hit a joint, show up, knock out a
Yeah,
performance, and then call it a day. Um,
literally.
so did he didn't play a lot of villains, did he? This is like pretty because I've only seen a few of his movies. So this is kind of like
Yeah,
is this playing against type fully, or is it kind
I
of
would
like
s-
playing with
I
people's
would
understandings
say,
of
like, I don't know if you've seen the original Cape Fear, which
I have not.
was done I just saw it 1962. That was obviously much later, and I think it's playing off the fact that he was able to play a villain in this one, and he
Hmm.
plays a villain in that one, and, like, he does it in, Home from the Hill, which is a Vincent Minnelli film where he plays, like, a I don't know if it's a villain, but he's a very overbearing dad, and he's just not a nice guy. But those are always they feel a little off-putting because he's never usually that guy. Even in the
Hmm.
noirs that he's doing, he's usually the guy who's gotten himself into trouble that you're rooting for. So it's very rare that you're not rooting for Mitchum. Even if he's maybe not even if he's done, like, a crime, you're still rooting for him type of
Hmm.
thing. So it's very rare that you're not. So that's why I think it's more effective in something like this or Cape Fear.
So, okay, with that like baggage that he brings, um, had you seen his other movies before watching this, and like were you bringing that to this, and you were like, I want to root for him, but I can't? Do you think that there like that was maybe part of the reason that people were like not as receptive to it when it first came out, or because they were used to like they were like, I want to cheer for this guy, but it kind of feels like I can't.
Yeah, I mean, for myself, I might have seen the original Cape Fear before I first watched this, but I wasn't
Mhm.
really familiar with his work. Since then, obviously I have been. But so knowing that and with rewatching this and having seen, if you go on Letterboxd and you look at your most watched actor, he's probably like at least top 3 of my most watched actor. So I've seen
I
a
love it.
lot at this point. And I'm like, if I had been in that era, I also probably would have been like, oh no, I don't want to see him as a bad guy.
Yeah.
Especially involving children. So I could see why that would be off putting to people because it's not like it's an early role from him. Like he had been in a lot of stuff
Hmm.
before this, so people would have known. They would have been going to see this for Mitchum, probably, to be honest.
Yeah.
So it probably was a little off-putting.
That yeah. I mean, that would be like if we went to see a movie. If we show up to see Annette and we find out that Adam Driver is actually, you know, some devious dude who's messing with baby Annette. I don't know why that was the Adam Driver movie that I pulled for that example.
Yeah, that's a
But,
that's a deep cut there, and a
yeah,
moderate deep cut.
uh, but a good cut, um, I think. So, okay, Mitchum is great. The Powell character is like extremely captivating. But there are
Mhm,
some other very,
mhm,
very, very awesome characters in this movie, including Miss Cooper, who
mhm,
I
yes.
thought was fantastic. But do you want to give a shout or some shine to her or to any of the other characters, like either of the kids or
Mhm.
anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I on this watch, oddly enough, Lillian Gish, who plays Miss Cooper, was probably one of my favorite performances. But before I get into that, both the kids are great. I will say the little girl, she kind of does have a little bit of an annoying face, unfortunately. And I just was like, girl, just shut up.
Yeah,
Listen to your brother. Um,
but also a great face, like just like
great
of
child face of the time. You don't get faces
yeah.
like that anymore.
No, she looks like a Depression era kid. Like that
Very
was great
much.
casting. Like yeah, you have Dust Bowl written all over you.
I was like, wow, I have not seen a child look like that
Yeah.
in my lifetime, to be honest. Um, but both the kids really, and to be honest, John and what's the actor's name? Billy Chapin, who wasn't,
Mhm.
both of the kids weren't really in that much films post this, but he really kind of carries this movie and he does a
Yeah.
really good job. They both seem like they would actually be siblings. And I think it's a lot for two kids to carry a film knowing, to be honest, I don't know what the laws were like back then for child actors and how long they could actually work. I'm sure they were forced to work a lot longer than they would be now, unfortunately, but they did a good job. Shelley Winters, who I love. I do always find it unfortunate that her role is kind of like a nothing role in this because she's such a great actor who could have given more.
Mhm.
But I guess the character calls for just being bland, unfortunately. I think they could have given her a bit more, but it is a short movie, so there's only so much you can do. Lillian Gish, though, is so captivating, and I think I wish we had gotten her a little earlier, but when she does come on screen, she's just so great to watch, and you're really rooting for her and the kids to just make it out of it. And the scene that she's kind of singing along with Powell, I thought was really, really strong because she's
Yeah.
just like, you think you're in charge, but it's actually I'm the one calling the shots here.
Yeah.
So it's great.
There their whole dynamic is obviously like, it's obviously great. The sort of like two sides of like how people can interpret religion and like use it in the
Mhm.
world. There's the Powell character who's using it for all of the wrong reasons for just like his own personal gain. Like we don't even really know why he wants the money that he is after from this family, or that he like is after from all of these widows. It's just like, I'm just, America, baby. Just I'm going to gather and collect and amass as much wealth as I can because that's my God given, right and duty, sort of. And
Mhm.
she's like, no, we should use religion and all the teachings of Christianity to like help other people, like take in kids who have been orphaned or whatever. And that moment where they're, both singing, and like you were saying, she's the one who's actually in control.
Mhm.
It's just like such a like beautiful, I don't want to say simple because there is like a lot that's going on there in terms of like the depth of focus and stuff, and then like the like cool lighting trick with like the candle and everything that happens.
Yeah.
It's just like, yeah, like, oh, these people were having a lot of fun making this movie, where they were like, here's a cool visual trick that we can do, while telling this story. That whole scene is just like, to me, like the movie is kind of like summed up in
Yeah.
in that moment, really. But the Cooper character, she's so great. She's amazing.
She's great. Yeah. She is definitely the voice of reason in this. And sometimes not necessarily with her character, but with some of the dialogue, and can feel heavy-handed and not skip to the end, but there is a certain scene breaking the fourth wall that feels very like, okay, we're reading a passage from the Bible type of thing. But the lead up to it makes me forgive it, where I'm like, okay, I'll allow you that because it's 1955.
Hmm.
I'm not gonna, tear you apart for that. But I think she's a great foil, and to have such a big hitter like Lillian Gish, who's been in films since the silent era,
Hmm.
and the inspiration that Lawton and Cortez had on of watching silent film and making this one, which you can see,
Hmm.
as we talked about it, having a silent era star be in this and have such like a great role just as a person, but also a female role in
Hmm.
this film, which is so kind of powered by Mitchum's character and his gusto. And it's not a diss to Mitchum. That's just his presence on film. He's very kind of like American male. And I
Yeah.
say that with like absolute love. He's very much a version of American men that I think was so popular in film, and why he became such a great star, with not, as we mentioned, not being the most, you know, beautiful of men,
Yeah.
but he's a captivating person to watch, and he looks great on film. You don't have to be beautiful to look great on film. So,
I don't think truer words have ever been spoken on this show. Yeah, you don't have to be beautiful to look great on film.
no.
Um, the uh, with Lillian Gish and her like inclusion in this film, we were talking about how this movie is pulling a lot from like German expressionism. One of
Mhm.
the other things that I came across was that this movie was also heavily influenced by the one and only D.W. Griffith, who
Yeah.
there are whole conversations to be had about his place within the history of cinema, but he was influential an as a filmmaker and as an artist, which is like, we can
Mhm.
separate art from artist all that we want
Mhm.
there. And my understanding is that she was in, because I'm not like familiar with a ton of his work, saw like clips of Birth of a Nation and early in film school, and I was like, I don't know if I need this in my life.
You
So
don't.
I didn't really, dive all the way into him, but my understanding is that she was a player in like a lot of his films. So like the influence is not only in like the way that the story is told and shot and everything, but also that like literal, we're pulling one of the players from his movies into this film.
Hmm. Very much. And I love when directors do that of being like, I'm now pulling a piece of history into my film to also mirror the
Hmm.
history that I'm inspired by. But yeah, she was a big player in a lot of D.W. Griffith's films, namely Birth of a Nation, a film that I personally feel like a lot of people don't necessarily need to see. You can watch clips and get enough of it. It's a long film and it feels very heavy, and you're not going to get anything out of watching the whole thing. And I don't often dissuade people from watching stuff, but I'm like, I've seen it once, I don't plan on watching it again. Um, but like Mitchum has also been pulled into things in his later career where he did
Hmm.
like, but yeah, Mitchum has been pulled in his later career into like some 70s, kind of neo noirs where they're playing off the fact that he was big in 40s noirs. And I love when directors do that. I don't know that, I'm trying to think of when that's happened more recently of pulling people into films, but uh,
Yeah. The only
I
one I
don't
can
know.
really think of was like Tarantino being like, "Oh, no one's used Harvey Keitel since Scorsese did, back in the day.
Tarantino is a
Let
good
me put him
one.
into some," or like,
Yeah,
yeah, I love Pam Grier movies, so let me write her, a starring role or something. Yeah.
exactly. But he's the type of person, as much as people like shit on him, I still think his work in preserving film history is really good. So he's the type of person to do that. But yeah, Lillian Gish
Yeah.
is great in this. And she went on to make films up until like the late 80s, I think it was.
Queen. Absolute
Yeah,
queen.
truly.
Yeah, we love that. Uh, we love that for her. So, okay. Speaking of love, the really corny transition would be to talk about the love and hate hands. Or
Yes.
or we can just talk about how this is Charles Lawton's only film and what a tragedy that is and like everything surrounding that. So
Hmm.
I leave that choice up to you of which
I
direction we
mean,
go in.
we could briefly talk about both, but like the love and hate hands are funny ish, but I like the inspiration that Spike Lee took for his film,
Hmm.
uh, of having that in why am my brain's oh, Do the Right Thing. The film, the inspiration that he took for Do the Right Thing, and having his main character, well, not one of he's not a main character, but one of the
Yeah.
characters have that, and he's a big film nerd, so I like, how this film stood the test of time, which I think is a good transition as to why Lawton only made this one, and it's unfortunate is because like this just really didn't do well,
Hmm.
and I think he was probably hurt and maybe feeling discouraged by the fact that this didn't do well and just didn't do anything else, which is really unfortunate. He went on to still make films because he's a huge actor
Hmm.
before this and post this, but I think it's really unfortunate when a director only makes one and it's because like that one film just didn't do well. And then if he were around today, I'm sure he'd love to hear. It's kind of like the Van Gogh thing of like no one
Yeah.
gives a shit when he was around, and he's literally the most celebrated artist of all
Yeah.
time. It's unfortunate and it's sad to think about, to be honest. But I think there's also a like a bittersweet beauty to that
Hmm.
of having your work, you know, stand the test of time because people are still talking about this movie. And that's fine if people at the time didn't get it, that's their loss. We're still
Yeah.
winning.
Yeah, it is really sad, but it also creates this like whole like mythology around the movie and around him as a director where, the question will always be like, what could have been? Would he have made other great films, or would it have been you know, I can't think of
Yeah.
another example of someone who just like knocks it out of the park with their first film and then everything else is kind of like disappointing. But
Yeah.
there there are a lot of seeds here in terms of like, what's being done. Again, both like visually and like with the story and everything, and like obviously as an actor directing other actors, where the thought is if he had made other movies, they also would have been great. So it is like a super just like tragic sort of like note in film history that this was the only movie that he made, and uh it wasn't until like the wave of like De Palma and Coppola and those guys where it was sort of like rediscovered, and then
Hmm.
Spike Lee references it and Do the Right Thing, and then you have like whole other film communities who are coming to The Night of the Hunter 20, 30, 40, 50 years later, and like rediscovering how great it is. But like you said, it's bittersweet. It's it adds to the legend of the movie, but it
Hmm.
also kind of takes away from like what we could have had as film fans.
I know. I know. It's really sad. But then, like as we mentioned, Tarantino, someone like De Palma and Scorsese are such great pioneers of uh, being inspired by older film, but also promoting to be like, hey, you should actually. I've been inspired by this, but you should actually watch it
Yeah,
because it's probably better than what I did. I said this as like De Palma being my favorite uh director. I love that he's always just like, okay, you guys need to watch these movies though, because
yeah,
there's a lot of great things that have been made that just hasn't been given the dues. Criterion has been pretty good with that, with the channel and what they release of just bringing things back into the conversation and getting more eyes on it. So no
yeah.
complaints there.
It's always such a douchey thing to say, that like a certain film being in conversation with another film or whatever, but it is so true that like a lot of like the better films throughout film history are aware of like everything that exists
Hmm.
around it, before it, beyond it, and like pulling from them, not in like the Russo brothers like Community style ways where it's just like you're like referencing a line. That was an unnecessary shot at Community. That's a pretty good show. But like, but where you're pulling from it in order to like, you're stealing from movies that you love in order to make your own movie, and then people in the future will steal from it to make their own movies. Like the fact that this is referenced in Do the Right Thing, which is in its own ways like a very like revolutionary movie in the way that it like, but like totally tells you, hey, we understand all of the rules of filmmaking, and we're going to break all of
Hmm.
those rules and we're going to reshape them. Like that's what this movie is doing. The Night of the Hunter is like, okay, we understand what it is that that makes a movie. Like we understand like all of the language around putting together a film, and we're going to break those rules, and we're going to open with like this weird shot of kids in the stars like listening to some like bedtime Bible story, uh
Uh,
about good and evil, or like false prophets in sheep's clothing, you know
yeah.
and we can do that because we understand what it is that makes movies work, because we have such a grasp of the language. So we're going to like break and bend and twist those rules a little bit and give you something that's totally fresh.
Yeah. I think the best type of films are, I mean, you can try and make something as original as you want, but at the end of the day, we should all be inspired by the, you know, the art that preceded us. How you go about it is what makes, something like Do the Right Thing iconic as opposed to being like, well, this is just a ripoff of
Hmm.
something else. Uh, and I think it also is a testament to the filmmakers just being open about, hey, this inspired me and
Yeah.
this is why you should also seek it out. So just passing on knowledge to the next generation who can be inspired by your work along with the stuff of the past too. So
Yeah. And also
yeah.
when you're pulling from like kind of weird different things, like to pull from D.W. Griffith and German Expressionism, and also like uh Southern Gothic like literary elements. That's like a weird
Mhm.
combination that shouldn't really make sense. Like, oh, we're going to tell a story about a Depression era false preacher in West Virginia, like with German expressionism, with like influences from the cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Like, what do you mean that
Yeah.
makes no sense? Like in 1955, if someone comes into your studio executive, they come into your office and say that, you're going to be like, that makes no fucking sense.
I know. I mean, even today, if someone were to pitch that, they'd be like, "Okay, maybe some people might get it, but the rest of people will
Yeah.
just not get the blend of image with tone with message." So it takes a, a very careful hand to blend those together. So I think it's a combination of all the people that he had working on that film that works so well in this. So yeah.
Yeah. It's an amazing movie. I am like kind of kicking myself that I've only seen it once, but I am happy that I've now seen it, and I'm excited to rewatch it over and over and over again.
Yeah,
Is
I
there,
mean, it's like 92 minutes, so it's like we don't often get shorter, very quaint movies with so
yeah,
much like history and so much to tell. I think that's why I love it more. I'm very much pro 90-minute movie. I love it when you can give me so much rich history and a good amount of time. So it's easy to rewatch, is what I'm saying. You don't
yeah,
need to rewatch it this week, but if you revisit it a couple years down the line, you're going to get so much more out of it, I'd say.
yeah. People always ask me like, why do I watch more movies than TV? And I always say like, committing to something for like 90 minutes to 2 hours that might be just okay, it to me is always going to be more exciting than
Mhm.
committing to like an 8 hour Netflix miniseries that
I
like
know.
will probably not be okay. Even though you're digesting it in 50-minute chunks, you're
Mhm.
still over time committing more time to something that is like, I think, like much higher. there's there's a lot less room for reward. There's much higher risk in
Mhm.
those types of things. And even like, you watch a 90-minute movie from 1954, it's going to be like low risk, and it can be very high reward. Or if it's not that good, you're like, whatever, it was done in 90 minutes and now I don't have to think about it anymore. Or you watch The
Yep.
Night of the Hunter and you're like, that's one of the most amazing things I've ever seen.
Oh, everything you said, 100% agree. I can't even add to it. That's exactly how I feel. And
Yeah.
it's not even to knock on TV because I do watch some of it, but not often. Like I'll watch maybe one show here and there. But to me, like you said, if I watch a movie that maybe was like, okay, well, I'm done with it.
Hmm.
Like I don't have to be like, well, do I just stop in the middle of the season or do I watch the whole thing and then be like, well, I hated that. Why did I spend so much of my
Yeah.
time with it
There's also
that
something about experiencing like a single piece of art as opposed
mhm,
to like disjointed pieces of art. And we can call
yeah,
both movies and TV shows art, where like, I don't know, like I like listening to albums because it's like,
mhm,
you like have this like set period where you're engaging with something in like a very intentional way, and then you can walk away from it and you have your takeaways. You either like it or you don't like it. And I think that movies offer the best version of that. um Sorry, that was a weird ramble to
no,
to go on.
I 100% agree. So you don't need to convince me. I know that TV has become like a bit more of a thing nowadays.
Hmm.
And I always try not to knock TV. Same way I try not to knock modern films. I'd just be like, I'm open to both. But I think, as you said, you're running into less of a risk with watching a film, but the reward can be a lot higher. So they can reward can be higher for TV too, but I
Yeah.
wouldn't necessarily know myself.
uh I just, yeah, all we're saying is, if you haven't seen Night of the Hunter, or if you are maybe someone who is hesitant at times to put on an old movie, try it out. It'll be nice. Something like this, 90 minutes, you'll probably be surprised. With something like this, you might be surprised and enjoy, something else, whatever it might be. And that's the beauty of film. Felicia, was there anything else specifically about Night of the Hunter that you wanted to bring up or talk about?
I would say that if you loved the way this looked, I would highly encourage you to not only look at other films shot by Stanley Cortez, but also look at other films. And like, Letterboxd is a good tool for that. Google's a good tool for it, but ones that are similar to it, and then get to know who is shooting these films, because we want to celebrate the actors, the directors, but a lot of the time when you really enjoy a film, it's because of the way it looks and it's because of the cinematographer, along with other people on the set.
Hmm.
But I think if you find some cinematographers that you really like, you're going to discover a wide range of films that are going to blow your mind that you wouldn't have even thought of to look at or heard of. And that's the best way, in my opinion. I always recommend to people who are especially getting into film, like, pick one movie that you like, who shot it. You're going to discover so many great films from there, because a director might create a lot of similar films, but cinematographer might
Hmm.
not. Their look might be somewhat similar, but they're doing so many different, genres, and sometimes they're shooting multiple films a year, so they have a huge range of filmographies to go through. It's gonna change your life. And I don't think I'm talking it up too much. I think it's gonna change your life if you start looking at who shot these films and how can I discover more of what they did.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's right. Like you were saying, like we often, when you think about like not so much like auteur theory, but when
Mhm,
we're thinking about like the big players in movie making, oftentimes people will follow like a particular screenwriter, which also great. Like you watch, oh my god, why am I blanking on his name? uh Schrader, Paul Schrader. You like
mm,
watch like all of his like movies that he's written, and you're like, oh, there are like definitely some through lines here, although they're different because sometimes it's being picked up by different directors who will interpret and like work with his work in different ways. Or you get tied to a particular actor and you're like, I want to understand, the career arc of like Robert Mitchum, or last week talking about Humphrey Bogart and like what their roles and sort of like off-screen public persona were like, and like how the two sort of inform each other, right? You think about someone like Tom Cruise, and like it's
mhm,
just like such an interesting look into, like, you look at his career and you're like, okay, this guy is like doing interesting work and creating like a very particular kind of both on-screen and off-screen persona in what he's doing.
mhm.
So we look at
Yeah.
actors a lot, but cinematographers are um often not folks who we're looking at. But like same can be said of composers, editors, maybe to a
Mhm.
lesser extent, because a lot of times like certain editors will like only work with like the same director. So like Thelma,
Yeah.
absolute queen, but like she's only doing Marty stuff, so you're not getting like a lot of that variance in her work. It's all brilliant, but like, but yeah,
Yeah.
cinematographers, like pick a cinematographer, look at what they're doing, like through different films and like different directors and stuff that they're working with, and you'll get just like you'll get an interesting story of their work and their
Mhm.
relationship to cinema as a whole. So thank you for that takeaway. I think that's something that we can all do a little bit more of.
I hope so, myself included. I'm
I
always
know
seeking out more.
it's already February, but like still a good time to for some, New Year resolutions. So maybe I'll
Very
add
much.
that to my list to, to focus more on cinematographers. Um, amazing. Is there anything else about Night of the Hunter that we did not hit?
Um, I don't think so. I think we hit on anything that if you haven't seen this movie and you're listening to this, I don't think we've spoiled anything, to be honest. Now that I think of it, I don't think we spoiled anything. So
Yeah.
you could definitely listen to this without having seen it, and I hope this inspires you to watch it. I'm sure it's already on your list if you're listening to this and you haven't seen it. So I hope this is the push that gives you to uh, watch it. It's pretty easy to find online,
Yeah.
and Criterion has a great print of it, and it's 92 minutes. It's not going to take up much of your time, but it's going to change your life, I'd say.
Yeah. Absolutely. I co-sign that. We did say that we were going to talk about the ending, but
Oh yes.
you know, I like this idea of no spoilers.
I like
So
it too.
maybe we don't talk about the ending, but there's some stuff happening there for sure.
There's some stuff. Yeah,
There's
but
yeah.
I'd say let's keep it a spoiler free. You can
Yeah.
market it as that and be like, we didn't spoil it. If you haven't watched the movie, this is your
Yeah.
push to watch it.
I mean, we've had what 60 plus years to watch it, but
That's true.
that's fine. We still won't spoil it. I didn't get around to it until this week, so
That's all good.
I'm sure there are others who are in the same boat.
Oh, I'm sure.
So so with all of that, I think we can get into some recommendations for other things to
Mhm.
check out for the Night of the Hunter, which I'm sure are going to be very, very, very fun. So, in case there's anyone listening who's not familiar with what we do, we'll do a quick rundown of recommendations. But for each movie in the canon, we will recommend 3 things per guest host to check out if you like said movie. So, if you like Night of the Hunter, if you haven't seen it and you watch it and you're like, I need other stuff to check out after this, we'll recommend some things for you to check out. At least one of them has to be another movie. But the other 2 recommendations can be any and everything else. It can be more movies. It could be a TV show. Even though we both just spent 5 minutes talking about how we don't watch a lot of TV. It could be a book. It could be a video game. It could be an artist. It could be a painter or a musical artist. It could be an album, a song, really anything. We like to get pretty wacky and out there. The connections to the movie can be as loose or on the nose as we like. And any movies that we recommend just can't be movies that are already in the canon. So I don't know, like I mentioned Citizen Kane, that's not going to be one.
Mhm.
Canon of Dr. Caligari, can't recommend. Unfortunately, Birth of a Nation in the canon. Well, not unfortunately, because it is a seminal film. So Birth of a Nation, not something that we can recommend. But anything not in the canon, fair game. Um, Felicia, you'll go first. You'll give us a brief rundown of what you're recommending, and then the name or
Okay.
the name, and then a brief rundown. Um, and then I'll give my first, and we'll kick it back and forth until we've got all 3.
Okay. So just prefacing that all 3 of mine are movies. I feel like I did this last time
Hell
because
yeah.
it's
I
on
love
my
people
brain.
who only see the world and understand through
Yeah.
movies. Yeah.
I could have thought of maybe an album, but I was like, "Oh, my brain always goes to movies." But the first one I thought of, I was thinking of Charles Laughton and the fact that this is the only film he directed, and I was trying to think of other films that I like, where a director it was the only time they made a film, but they were also actors. I thought of a film from 1970 called Wanda. It's directed by Barbara Loden. It's very nouveau 70s American film. This is done it would be done just a little bit after Easy Rider, which I think was 69. So this is
Hmm.
70. It's going into a very on the nose, uh not on the nose, maybe kind of an American kitchen sink, very straightforward, no frills type of filmmaking. It's very bare bones. And to have a woman director do this, and Barbara Loden was a Hollywood actress before this. She wasn't a huge name, but she was still a name. And she's making something very raw and honest about a woman kind of going through a very difficult time. It's very beautiful film. Criterion put it out a few years ago, so you
Mhm.
can definitely find. I think it's on the channel right now. I'm not sure, but they definitely have it released, and it's easy enough to find. So that'd be my first recommendation.
Nice. I like it. I have not. It's not been on my radar. So yet another movie to add to the ever growing watch list. I
Hmm.
like it. I'm gonna start with something pretty basic, and then maybe the connections will get a little looser as we move along. For my first recommendation, I feel like a movie that is like very, 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 very clearly pulling from this in a lot of ways, and a movie that every time it like pops into my head, I love it more and more. Um, I'm gonna recommend Martin Scorsese's take on Cape Fear, which at first I was like, this movie's
Hmm.
kind of meh, but again, the more that I think about it, I'm like, that movie kind of like really kicks ass. And De Niro's performance is like very heavily inspired by what Mitchum is doing here in a lot of ways. And I think the film is also just like in general pulling from this in a lot of like cool and interesting ways.
Oh yeah, I mean, I love his Cape Fear, and it's also it does tie into this because Mitchum played the De Niro character in the original
Mhm.
Cape Fear.
Yeah.
So
So it's
I think it's like we mentioned of pulling from back, past actors, past films. So I think that's a great uh
yeah,
pairing or recommendation for this one.
it's like it's right there. It just felt too obvious to not take.
Yeah, that's fair. Um My second one, I was going kind of talked about how great it is to have kind of the bad preacher in quotes in films, and I'm thinking of Elmer Gantry, which is 1960, is starring Burt Lancaster, who I love, Gene
Mhm.
Simmons, who I mentioned before, but Burt Lancaster is playing someone who's getting into preaching because you can see the money that comes into it. The same way Mitchum character is kind of trying to get towards the money by using the fact that he claims he's a preacher, so to get people to trust him.
Mhm.
Um, so this is a great one where it's just focusing on people misusing the trust that people have for people within organized religion, and how you can play people by just claiming that you're a person of God, and takes it to a new level. It's not a horror film, but it
Mhm.
also kind of is, I guess, in a sort
Okay.
of way. Um, but it's more so a straight up drama. It's a lot longer than this one. This is like almost 2.5 hours, but
Okay.
it's worth the time, I would say, and not just because I love Burt
Yeah.
Lancaster.
No, I love that. I love yeah, I feel like I need more movies about people weaponizing religion to
Mhm.
create scams. It's like the most to me it's the most American thing possible. I've always said
Yeah.
that the one true great American hero is oh my god, why am I blanking on his name? The Scientology guy.
Oh, what is his name?
Oh man.
Let's see.
He's the pinnacle of utilizing religion to create a great American scam, and I'm totally
Oh,
forgetting his name.
L. Ron Hubbard.
L. Ron Hubbard. That yes, an absolute legend. I apologize to my king for forgetting his name, but yeah, that movie sounds amazing and just like a perfect pairing for this.
Mm,
Again, nothing more American than weaponizing religion for the sake of collecting a few dollars.
yeah.
We love it. Awesome. I guess it's back to me. My second recommendation, I'm gonna go with something. There's like a big part of this movie is the idea of two children trying to like escape this unimaginable like evil and horror and monster that is coming into their home. Uh, a movie that's more so about like dealing with an evil that is like already within the home, that is absolutely wonderful, and I only saw for the first time like a year or two ago, but like totally knocked my socks off, was The Innocents. I think there's a bit of overlap between just like kids
Yeah.
dealing with like unimaginable horror uh, in their house. Kind of a
Yes.
different vibe from this. Like, not a, it's a British movie, and like incredible use of like wide lens photography, just incredible stuff. A weird pairing, but also I think a good worthwhile pairing for this movie.
Oh yeah, I don't think it's weird at all. I think it's like perfect. I love The Innocents. I love Deborah Kerr. I love the way it's shot, and especially if you're looking for something that's like somewhat visually similar, it would be a great pairing.
Yeah,
Just also, you get to spend time with two great films, two
yeah,
great horror films of that era. So you're in good hands, I would say.
yeah. That's a good night if you're going Night of the Hunter into The Innocents. You're yeah,
I'd say so. I was
yeah.
gonna say Halloween's coming up, but it's not really. But you don't need to watch horror just in Halloween era. So it's still kind of gloomy out right now. It's
Yeah.
winter. um, my last one, and I did mention it briefly when we were talking, but it's another film shot by Stanley Cortez, and it's Samuel Fuller's The Naked Kiss, which was released in 1964. This one I love. It's one of my all-time favorites, but it's one of those movies that people either love or they hate. I have not met anyone who is in between where they're just like they
Yeah.
like it because the tone is difficult to sit with if you're not open to it. And maybe that sounds harsh, but I think that if you're going into this thinking it's going to be one thing and you're upset that it's not, it might not be for you. But if you go into this just being like, I have zero thoughts, I don't want to
Mhm.
give too much about it, kind of go into this with no expectations other than you're being given great performances. It looks beautiful. It's shot beautifully in black and white. And it's Samuel Fuller, in my opinion, at his best and his oddest.
Mhm.
It's dark, it's great, and I have to assume it's also like a 90-minute movie. It's very quick to watch.
Okay, sweet.
Also put out by Criterion. Maybe on the channel right now, I don't know, but they definitely I have the Criterion release, which was done by the cover was done by Daniel Klaus for any Ghost World nerds out there. So, if you're looking for other stuff shot by
Yeah.
Cortez,
Okay,
that
sweet.
would be my top one.
Amazing. I think that's on my watch list. I think I need to bump it up now. Um,
It's good.
yeah. Fun. I'm intrigued to know where I'll fall on the love or
I
hate
am too. I won't judge
spectrum.
you because
Yeah.
I see both sides of it, but I'm on the love side of it. I'm on the
Okay.
love versus the hate.
You're on the right hand.
Yes. I'm
You're on
on the right
Michelle's right
hand.
hand. Oh man, I love it. Ah, I I right hand it. That's such a dumb joke. That's just like dad joke city. Okay, for my last recommendation, I'm gonna go with an album, and the connection is kind of weird. I've been trying to recommend more albums because I feel like otherwise I'm just gonna run out of movies if I do 3 movies all the
Yeah.
time. So there's the song that Mitchum sings throughout the film, the song that we mentioned that he was singing with the Miss Powell character or Miss Cooper
Mhm.
character rather at the end, the leaning um, in your everlasting arms or whatever.
Mhm.
Whenever I watched all movies with captions on, and whenever I saw Everlasting Arms, I kept thinking about the Vampire Weekend song Everlasting Arms. So I'm
Mm.
going to recommend the Vampire Weekend album that song is on. I'm going to recommend Modern Vampires of the City, which is an incredible
Mhm.
album. Their song Everlasting Arms, it's not anything like the Leaning on Everlasting Arms song that we get in this movie, but doesn't matter. It's a great album and you should check it out.
Oh, okay. Is this like their second
It's their
album?
3rd album, yeah, like
Okay.
2012-ish maybe or s
I'm
so.
trying to think if I know any of the
Yeah,
songs. Maybe if I hear them, I would
like
know.
Step, Hannah Hunt, Yeah
Mm.
Hey, Obvious Bicycle. It's a good album. It's probably like top
I
2
recognize
album
the
for me.
album cover, so
Yeah,
I probably recognize some of the songs,
it is a good album
on it.
cover, too, on top of being a good album. But yeah, that's my 3rd recommendation.
That's
Um,
good one.
yeah, I feel like we got some good ones. We got 5 movies and an album. That's,
Yep,
uh that's a good weekend. That's a good weekend
I
for
would say
sure.
so.
Yeah.
I would say so.
So, yeah, definitely check the all of those out. Should we run through them, quickly one last time? Boom, boom, boom,
Mhm.
before we get out of here. So, what are your 3?
My 3 were Wanda, Barbara Loden, and the second one was Elmer Gantry, which is 1960, I believe, starring Burt Lancaster, and the third one was Naked Kiss. Sorry, the last film, Elmer Gantry, is Richard Brooks, directed, I forgot to mention, and Naked Kiss is Samuel Fuller, which is 1964.
Amazing. I'm recommending Scorsese's take on Cape Fear, The Innocents from I think 61, and the Vampire Weekend album Modern Vampires of the City. Felicia Maroni, thank you again for joining. This has been an absolute blast. Um, where can people listen to the show or follow you on the interwebs if they want to chat more
Mhm.
movies with you?
There's a website under the name seeingfacemovies.com, but then I'm on all the, streaming platforms, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And I have an Instagram and a Twitter, aka X for now. We'll see what's going on there. But I would say Instagram for now, which is also problematic, but
Yeah. Well,
that's the
and
internet.
letterboxed.
Letterbox, I do have my own letterbox. I have one for the the show, but I would say my own is what I
Yeah.
use quite often, and that
I
I'm
think you're I
under.
think you're a good follow.
I like to review everything that I watch, which I know I'm not judging people who don't, but I feel like I can't log something without writing something about it, even if it's something small, and it usually ends up being like at least 3 or 4 paragraphs, not an essay, but sometimes just me gushing
Nice.
or just talking about my personal life, but I'm Cinnamoroni uh, under that, platform.
Amazing. Honestly, that's the way to go. I also feel that like compulsive need to write something about everything that I see, but I oftentimes fall into the annoying one line
That's
jokey
okay.
review, which but I tell myself that they're more so for me than for
Yeah.
others. There's nothing that I enjoy more than like going back to my old letterbox reviews and being like, wow, I was cooking with this one. Uh,
Yeah, sometimes I'm like, "Wow, I was obviously angry that day," or I was, like, feeling very generous, but it's usually me looking back and being like, "Okay, I obviously was having not a great day when I watched this." I try and be like, but I am a big, fan of giving a 5-star out, so it'd be very rare if you see something under 3 stars for me, to be honest.
oh,
This one's a
interesting. I like that.
5-star.
Yeah. I love hearing everyone's different like approaches to uh
Letterboxd?
like star ratings,
Mhm.
leaving reviews, logging movies, all of that stuff. It's a really interesting uh peek into how we all relate to movies.
It's very much um, I was mentioning before we started recording, do a film club Monday nights, and we every member has their own version of how they operate on that, and I get roasted all the time because I'm too generous with my
Yeah.
star ratings. I'm like, okay, some of us are lovers, not haters.
Yeah.
I'm a right-hander.
Yeah, you're a right-hander, some of us are left-handers.
Yeah,
We
a
we
lot of
probably
people
need
are left-handers.
we need more right hands in the world. I could probably use some more right hand in
I'm only that for film. Everything else, I'm a massive
yeah.
hater.
At least in how I approach my star ratings too on Letterboxd. I'm the guy who's like reserving 5 stars for like very few movies. Like
Oh, I'm the opposite.
like everything to me is a 4 star and nothing is a 5 star.
4 stars is still good though.
Yeah, 3.5 is good.
3.5 is
Three
good.
3.5 is good. People hate on a 3.5, but 3.5 is like to me good or like very good. I
Yeah,
would say 4 is
yeah.
great.
4
Five's
is great.
outstanding. Yeah, 4.5's outstanding. 5 all time. I feel
Yeah,
like and most things are very good or great.
I would
So,
agree. I would
but yeah,
agree.
I could show some more love. Anyway, we're going to be showing love to another essential movie next week. And I'm happy that you're here because I have had trouble pronouncing this movie for quite some time. And I know that you're a French speaker. So,
Mhm.
how do you pronounce the movie about the lady who falls in love with her car? We'll say
Oh, Titan?
Titan. Okay.
Titan, yeah.
Okay. I've been saying something that I think is like that, and people have
I think a
been
lot of people say Titan or something, but it would
Titan.
be Titan, yeah, Titan.
Yeah, I've been saying Titan, which is like not all the way
Yeah,
there, but more there
it's good.
than
It's more
Titan.
it's better than what I've heard.
Okay. Um, I'm trying not to be, just like annoying American guy who butchers
It's all
all
good.
languages other than English. So we'll be talking about that movie next week, which I'm very excited to chat about. I am a big fan of that. Got some great guests lined up who will be joining us. I think we're going to have Nick from Bad Movies We Love on, as well
Mhm.
as Jacob Holmes, Screen Age Wasteland favorite. So it should be fun. We will see you there. And as always, in the meantime, I'll see everyone in the wasteland. Bye, all.